No, I don't want to talk about NHL officiating. No, I don't want to talk about the NHL officiating double standard. Nah, I don't want to talk about how TNT praises the Florida Panthers for playing on and over the edge. Nah, I don't want to talk about how the Florida Panthers seemingly always get the benefit of the doubt when they take a questionable play. Or I don't want to talk about how the Oilers only went 1 for 8 on the power play in a game the Florida Panthers went 3 for 11 on the power play. There's so much to talk about. I don't want to talk about any of it on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very depressing Tuesday morning edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second Stanley Cup playoff run as host of Locked On Oilers. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, where if you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So on today's episode, we are going to ramble through my subconscious because, frankly, I have enough thoughts to go the full 90 minutes of content I would need to do between now and games for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I have more than enough thoughts to sustain that and do it right now off the cuff, but we got to parse out our thoughts. It helps to put some separation between our emotions and what we're reacting to. So I will not rant for 90 minutes, but we're going to start with why the Florida Panthers are such a miserable hockey team, such miserable, godforsaken, words I can't say on this podcast, hockey team. We're going to pivot to what the Oilers didn't do tonight and why they looked so poor. And then in our final segment, we're going to talk about flushing it. So to start things out, the Florida Panthers are unequivocally one of the most successful franchises in the NHL over the last handful of seasons. They've made the last 3 Stanley Cup Finals. They have a lead in the Stanley Cup Final for the second straight season. They won it last year. This is a very well-built hockey team. They lost Brandon Montour. They brought in Seth Jones. They lose Vladimir Tarasenko. They bring in Brad Marchand. They lose Oliver Ekman-Larsson. They bring in Nate Schmidt. This team knows how to bring guys in, to integrate them, to make them successful. Now, the next 5.5 minutes are not a condemnation of talent. They are not a condemnation of playing on the edge, of playing physical hockey. They are not a condemnation of the Florida Panthers' moral character, what their standing is, what they mean to the NHL. I have been an impassioned defender of the Southern Hockey Project as a resounding success. I think the last 10 to 15 years in the NHL have largely proven the appetite is there and that you can build a successful hockey team in a non-traditional hockey market. But I need to clear out. I need an ISO. NHL officials are terrible at their jobs. I am so unbelievably tired of seeing Wes McCauley's face. I know the NHL thinks it's funny. He does the big dramatic announcements whenever there's a penalty. He is insufferable. At a certain point, let it go. And you saw what happens when referees do a bad job. The Oilers lost their collective minds down the backstretch of this game because they knew no matter what, they weren't winning this game. And is it a bit immature to do the Denzel Washington, I'm going to leave here with something and try and hurt someone, try and throw a big hit, instigate a fight, try and punch someone in the face? Is it immature? Yes. Do I understand it? Yes. Bill Burr, one of the great philosophers of our time, was speaking very broadly when he said, I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And I think that's the standard I would apply to the third period of this hockey game, because while we're going to talk about that more in the second and third segments, don't get me wrong, I do have thoughts, but when you feel like the officials are not calling the game fairly, it's reasonable that you're going to reach a boiling point, especially when the score gets out of hand. This is pretty common. We know this happens in the hockey world pretty often, and at a certain point, I understand losing your cool. And the Florida Panthers play hockey right on that line, the metaphorical line. We all know what it looks like when we see it, but we can't call it all the time because then the Panthers would take 1,000 penalties every game. And that's the source of my frustration. The Florida Panthers have effectively found an inefficiency in the NHL. They understand that officials manage the game. They don't officiate, they manage. They understand that if we constantly push and push and push and push the envelope as to what we can get away with clutching, with holding, with getting our stick in between legs and in skate blades, if we are constantly on that edge, if we're throwing a hit half a second later than we probably should, if we're getting elbows up high, all of those little things, you accumulate those into a big aggregate and you create an overall tabulation of how many plays the Florida Panthers should be penalized in a given hockey game. It's probably close to 40. But because we understand how officials work, that if we call 2 straight penalties on the Panthers, the next one has to be on the Oilers. It has to be. We got to keep the game competitive. We can't let this game get out of hand. We got to call it fairly. And you saw that in the first period. It was 4-4 power plays called for and against. Then, as the rest of the game went along, 7-4 in penalties called, I should say, not power plays, because some of the penalties did offset. We'll do an episode in the summer on the Gregory and Colin Campbell conspiracy theory that I'm sad to say is gaining more and more traction by the day as to why the Florida Panthers always seemingly to get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to officiating plays. I mean, you saw the one play tonight where the referee boxed out Klingberg trying to make a play on the puck. Barkov fully grabbing, turning, holding Klingberg, inhibiting his ability to move with Klingberg on the referee's body, physically touching him, and he didn't get called for holding or for hooking. But we can't call everything on the Florida Panthers. We can't call that many penalties in a given game. And then you wonder why the game gets out of hand. And look, the referees are never going to be good. I am very much of the school of thought that you need to play better than the officials officiate. It is when you leave the game in the hands of the officials, you didn't do enough. And that's very cliche. That's very Coach Taylor from Friday Night Lights. But you have to keep that mentality, because we know if you leave it up to the hands of the officials, who are incompetent, don't get me wrong, NHL officials are not good at their jobs. As much as TNT down here in the States likes to talk about what a great job they do, we have the best officials in the world. They did such a good job huddling to take away that penalty. They suck. NHL officials suck. They manage the game. They don't officiate. If they officiated the game, the Panthers would have had 25 penalties in this game, but we can't call that many penalties because that would be unsporting. That would make the game uncompetitive. And in finding this inefficiency, the Florida Panthers in this era that is trending towards smaller, skilled, and faster players have found an inefficiency in a bigger, stronger team that plays over that edge, that's a little bit more commiserate with the style of play we would have seen 5 to 10 years ago on like a Daryl Sutter LA Kings team. But don't get me wrong. The Oilers did not play well tonight. The Oilers did not deserve to win this hockey game, regardless of how incompetent and bad the NHL officials are. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Why, even if they did play poorly, and even if the referees maybe didn't do them any favors, there's still a whole lot of work to do. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Did you just realize your business needs to hire someone like yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs. Put your posts at the top of the page and help you find the right candidates fast. Right now, at my day job, we are currently trying to get more interns, and we are using Indeed to get the most out of our recruitment process, because every day without the right person on our team, it's a major setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now you can speed up your hiring process with the $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this miserably frustrating Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. And if you're starting the day with the show as a means of trying to contextualize and intellectualize the loss, you probably want tomorrow's episode. I'm going to be honest with you. Me rambling and talking about why the officials are bad and why the Oilers need to play better is probably not how you want to start your day if you're going to work, if you're going to school, if you're trying to run. I suppose if you're going for a morning run like I usually do and want to hate yourself a little bit more, listening to me talk about the Oilers play terrible could definitely inspire you to run a little bit faster to get your run over with. But nevertheless, I digress. I do appreciate everyone who is hanging out and making this episode part of their day. You have so many options. There have literally never been more options as to who to spend your time with. So to anyone who's taken the time on this Tuesday to commiserate in the misery amongst their fellow Oiler fans, I greatly appreciate you. So I don't want to rag on the Oilers too much because this game got out of hand. And I don't think the final score is particularly reflective of the game at large. I think anytime we're talking about a game where there's 20-something penalties called between the two teams, I don't think there's a whole lot to really analyze. I think my biggest and my most crucial takeaway, the Oilers have work to do as far as figuring out what they want to do with their defensive pairs, because what they did tonight just fundamentally did not work. Jake Wallman was outchanced 6-9. Brett Kulak outchanced 11-13. Nurse got it to 12-12. Klingberg got it to 13-9. Ekholm 13-6. Bouchard 19-5. But the real quandary becomes when you actually go to shots on goal and not scoring chances, because Wallman outshot 3-4. Klingberg 7-7. Nurse 7-6. Kulak 6-5. Ekholm 7-5. Bouchard 12-3 at 5-on-5. All of those numbers, because the Oilers did not generate enough offense tonight. Fundamentally, they didn't. They did not get the puck to high danger areas of the ice. I want to say at one point, I think the Oilers were credited with 7 or 8 high danger chances in the whole game. And this is a team that's typically good for 12 or so in a given game. Yeah, they only 2 high danger chances in the entire game on a team with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard at 5-on-5 is just not going to cut it. And look, I understand this game got away from you. I understand most of the numbers from that third period are they're not usable. They're non-functional. They're not relevant information because the game state was so out of hand. You couldn't possibly evaluate those numbers fairly with proper context. So even within that, after 2 periods at 4-1, you're not in a great spot, but the game is not over. I tweeted it as soon as the third period started. All it takes is 1 goal to make things interesting. You get 1 more goal, you get it to 4-2 with 15-ish minutes to go. All of a sudden, you start getting the gears turning. And we've seen the Oilers time and time again in these playoffs find ways in extremely adverse situations to pull games out of nowhere, out of absolute thin air. They have the talent level to do that. But their frustration got the better of them tonight, and it's entirely rational. It is entirely rational that in a playoffs that's largely been easy, and I shouldn't say easy, but manageable. They beat the Stars, they beat the Golden Knights in 5, the Kings in 6. The playoffs have been manageable. They've had a little bit of adversity. That Kings series definitely got a little tricky there. In the Vegas series, having to go back to Stuart Skinner after Pickard won 6 in a row, that's challenging for sure. But this is the first time all playoffs they genuinely had to eat a little bit of humble pie. You could say game 2 against the Kings, but that's the second game on the road, difficult. You're still kind of working off the rust of the last month of the season because so few guys played down the stretch because of injuries. But tonight, the Oilers really couldn't get anything going. And when this team that is constructed around offense, chance prevention, and puck control spends as much time as they did in their own end tonight, the recipe is just not going to be there. And I just did not feel good, especially defensively. And look, the penalty kill's been bad all playoffs. I've been banging that drum. I talked about it yesterday on the Monday Locked On NHL with Gil Martin. I talked about it on BetMGM. The Oilers penalty kill just isn't good. Flat out. It's just not good. And they're trying to break out bells and whistles. McDavid being out there in those situations is an interesting ploy to maybe try and set up some shorthanded scoring opportunities. Have Connor use his speed to create chances and frankly just break up lanes to try and slow down the Florida power play. I mean, Florida's power play is a bit of an outlier in the fact they use two defensemen, both of them being right-handed, in Jones and Ekblad. You saw Ekblad get the one power play goal towards the end of the game on that ridiculous behind the back pass from Reinhart. But the Panthers, man, that's a really good hockey team. And I've been pounding this drum since game one. You make mistakes this time of the year, they're going to end up in the back of your net. And yes, I understand the officials played a role in facilitating those pucks going in the back of the net. It's okay to be mad about the officiating. I am too. But talking about things the Oilers can actively control, actively improve themselves, they needed a better effort tonight. The same commitment to sound 5-on-5 hockey that has been their calling card these playoffs, where we've been calling them the deepest forward group of the McDavid Draisaitl era. They had been, up until this point, consistently controlling play at 5-on-5 throughout their lines, whether it was the McDavid line or whether it was the Matthias Janmark line. The Oilers were getting quality minutes top to bottom, and tonight you saw the defense really leak, and Darnell Nurse is such a frustrating hockey player because he has the capacity to make good decisions and play very effective hockey. He is a strong skater. He is big. He is athletic, but he is far too consistently not in the right place at the right time for someone of his skill set, of his stature, of his contract that you need him to be. The fact the Oilers were practicing with Bouchard on Sunday morning on Monday morning, and as a look as to what they could potentially do as a means of trying to shake things up after losing game 2, it gave me pause, because as much as I like Bouchard, trying to minimize the negative impact of Nurse by dragging down your first pair, that's not going to work either. Too many teams look at their best players as babysitters for their ineffective ones, when in reality, you should be trying to minimize any impact your weakest players have by playing them sparingly, by using them in very defined and specialized roles. Whereas you want to maximize what your best players do. You want to play Bouchard with McDavid as much as you can. The same way McKinnon and Makar are almost always out on the ice at the same time together, because they bring out the best in each other, because it allows the Avalanche to play at such a high level. Don't tell me, oh, but he plays with McDavid, he can't be. No. You play your best players with your best players, and you maximize the minutes you control the game, and you have a good chance to win. But when you try and distribute that risk more evenly, instead of having one good pair in Ekholm and Bouchard, you created two mediocre pairs in Darnell Nurse and Klingberg, and then Wallman and Kulak, excuse me. My brain is a little fried, if you couldn't tell. I'm tired. It's been a long weekend. I went to Gov Ball over the weekend. I have had basically no sleep. I've drank like no water, but we're moving, because in the Stanley Cup Finals, it means more, and it's your job to show up, and it's my job to show up and do a good job. And speaking of doing a good job, something the Oilers can do as far as a good job for game number 4, I'm going to tell you coming up next in our final segment. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers. We've got your team covered every day. There is nothing like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. With the Stanley Cup Final raging, there's never been a better time to see it live, and Game Time makes getting in the building fast and affordable. Game Time gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, the longer you wait, the closer you get to puck drop, ticket prices drop so you can score big without overpaying. My favorite part of the Game Time ticket buying experience is the seat view. If I'm going to a game, I want to get an idea of the view of the game. Am I going to have to look for the puck on the scoreboard during certain parts of play? Am I going to have to look down at the ice and try and match it up with what I'm seeing on the scoreboard? There are some arenas in the NHL where the sight lines, they're not so great. So using that seat feature, that panoramic seat feature, is such a useful tool. And most importantly, you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is sucking it up along with me here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where the vibe is somewhere between a Joker laugh and a Steve Dangle laugh, where I'm mad, but I haven't fully succumbed to psychosis yet the way I would if the Oilers went out and played like this again. And that brings me to the most important takeaway of this episode. You got to have a short memory. If the Oilers go out there with the mentality of, we're getting our lick back, we got embarrassed in Game 3, they're probably going to get embarrassed in Game 4. The Florida Panthers are too good at gaming this system. They flop incessantly. They play over that edge and dare the officials to call them on every little ticky-tack thing, and it becomes a vacuum where they're just not going to get called for those things. So if you go out there, if you're a Darnell Nurse and a Vander Kane, a Corey Perry, a Podkolzin and a Kapanen, someone who wants to play on that edge or over that edge, and you try and take a run at someone, they're going to throw you out of the game. They're going to go out of their way to make an example out of anyone in Game 4 who tries to turn this game into a circus, because the NHL doesn't want that. We have the highest standard of play in our league, and our officials' biggest priority is player safety, except when it's not convenient to managing the game, in which case then it's our biggest priority is managing the game as opposed to player safety. But again, I digress. With that in mind, number one, the next 2 days need to become Stuart Skinner psyching up mentality. The most important part of their actual game plan has to be getting Stuart Skinner the hard reset. I would have taken him out of the game at 4-1 just to tell him, hey, go to the room, take your shower, start getting ready. We need you on Thursday. Take tomorrow, decompress, reset. Chris Knobloch has earned my benefit of the doubt when it comes to his goalie management. I am sure Knobloch has a plan for giving Skinner the mental reset he needs. I think pulling him from this game was the right move. Frankly, like I just said, I would have done it earlier. If I think at 4-1, Knobloch maybe felt the game wasn't entirely over. At 5-1, you have to pull him because his confidence is so fragile and it's so important. Look, I don't think Skinner had a good game by any stretch. That first Marchand goal can't happen. He was too jumpy to make a play. I wrote down in my notes at one point, he looked really slow making reads tonight. I don't know if that was a net front traffic thing and just not really being able to track the puck particularly well. But Skinner didn't have a great game, and they're going to need him to be serviceable on Thursday. I'm not saying good. I'm saying not actively sink them. If he gives up a goal in the first 5 minutes of the game, and it's 1-0, that's okay. If it's 3-0, 10 minutes into the first period of Game 4, you can flush it, and we're going back to Alberta 3-1, and you're going to need a Herculean effort for the second straight year just to get to a Game 6. But we're not there yet. We need to pace ourselves. So we need to flush game number 3. We can't be taking numbers yet. We need Stuart Skinner to be as reset and as re-locked in as he possibly can be. Number 3, we need to find a way to get McDavid some space, whether that's playing him with a Vander Kane, whether that's Draisaitl, McDavid, and Kane, Draisaitl, McDavid, and Podkolzin, Draisaitl, McDavid, and Kapanen, whomsoever. If you want to play someone with those guys, if it's Nuge, even Nuge at the depreciated value he's at now with the injury that's clearly hampering him and was part of why the Oilers couldn't get a whole lot going at 5-on-5. And it's why you saw at one point in this game, the Oilers employing Jake Wallman on the power play in replacement of Nugent-Hopkins to try and create some different looks, to open up some space maybe for some more point shots, just to create some type of confliction reason for that Panthers penalty kill to have to consider. But you lose a game like this, it becomes so important to move on. And it is it might be the single hardest thing we have to do as humans. I'm not just talking about sports here. I'm talking about life. Moving on from difficult experiences is a challenge. The greats can use that challenge, that adversity, as a motivational tool, as something that coaxes them into a better performance, that coaxes them into a sense of self-shame so strong that it forces them to be better. Not everyone's wired like that. Some people entirely got to block it out, pretend it never happened, hope it fades into the deep recesses of their memory like sixth grade for so many people. But as we look to this game number 4, and we have so much to talk about between now and then, number one, for you, the listener, it's one game. One game does not define a series. I said it after game 1 where I was pounding my chest. I was feeling all confident, Oilers in 6, maybe even Oilers in 5. It's one game. You didn't play well, but the officials did you in. Your power play stunk. Your penalty kill stunk. Your goalie stunk. At 5-on-5, you stunk. You have a lot of room for improvement. And that's what we always talk about here on Locked On Oilers. The everydayers have heard me talk about this all the time. If you have room, if you have guys who have underperformed, who have room for positive regression, okay, you can sell me on a higher ceiling. And there may be no higher cause or better cause for a positive regression swing than losing a game 6-1 in which you went 1 for 8 on the power play and you killed off 8 of 11 penalties. The Oilers are not as bad as they played tonight, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be in the Stanley Cup Final. But it is within their range of outcomes. And this has to be the last time the Oilers play this poorly in this series if they would like to win the Stanley Cup. Look, if they can somehow win the next 2 games straight and it's 3-2, and you want to afford them a stinker in game 6 so they can win on home ice in game 7, we can have that conversation in the middle of next week when that would happen. But for now, you got to win game 4. You cannot go down 3-1 and realistically expect to beat this Florida team that is playing like a buzzsaw right now. That is playing some of the best hockey we have seen in the 2020s as a decade. As good as Vegas was 2 years ago, when they outscored opponents 66-33 at 5-on-5, this Panthers team is terrifying. This Panthers team is moving, like the Red Army in the beginning of the beginning of Miracle, where they're just smoking everyone in sight. I wanted to pull this up real quick. The Panthers are at 35-32 goal share, so they're almost at 66%, which is what the Golden Knights were when they won the Cup 2 years ago. I was curious about that. Wrapping up today's show, I don't want to talk more about the officials. We'll talk about that more some other time. Like I said, we'll do Gregory and Colin Campbell conspiracy theories at some point over the summer. But try, and I'm not going to successfully do it, but try to reset yourself. Try to decompress. We have 2 whole days where all we're going to hear about is the Oilers lost their cool. Are the Oilers out? Are the Oilers losing their edge? Are the Oilers starting to fray? Are the Florida Panthers this dominant? They're so smart. They goaded the Oilers into playing stupidly. They goaded the Oilers into all those penalties. Drown out the noise. For the love of God, for your mental health. Ignore every single talking head in the hockey world who's going to spend the next 2 days talking about how smart the Florida Panthers are for finding an inefficiency in the game because referees don't call penalties. Don't do it to yourself. You'll only get mad. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please, please, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you're on Apple or Spotify listening, please leave the show a 5-star review. It really does help. If you're over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're over 2,200 subscribers, which was our playoff goal to hit 2,200. So I'm so grateful to everyone who has jumped aboard since the start of the playoffs in mid-April. And this story's not written. The Oilers have something special in them. It's just going to take the right opportunity to bring it out. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. But first, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night over on the Locked On NHL feeds. Talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, Let's go Oilers.